What's going on, everyone? Today we're cracking Kyle. I'm going to go over build guides. So I'll be going over the characters very in depth and how to use them. Kyle is a controller. On the battlefield, he specializes in soaking up damage, protecting allies, rezzing allies if needed, and dishing out high burst damage when the time is right. His passive, Experienced Technician, it removes MP and grants something called Magnetic Force, which is equivalent to 200% of your maximum shield and drains 1% per second. So after 100 seconds, you will have no magnetic force. Then Magnetic Care procs, depending on your duration, whenever your shields are depleted. Whenever Magnetic Care procs, you gain 4% of your shields and your magnetic force gauge every second. His magnetic force you can see as the purple bar on the bottom underneath his shield, with the MP gauge blanked out. The first ability, Repulsion Dash, grants you magnetic force and recovery upon use. It has 3 stacks, a 12-second cooldown, which you can get easily spammable, and the maximum move distance of 10 meters. The movement distance cannot be increased, however, the radius can be. I say radius, but it's actually a cube. So you'll see this enemy that was standing right here got hit, but this enemy that was standing over here did not get hit. And then the enemy behind him also gets hit. So it is a weird cube that Kyle uses. So whenever you use the ability, you get 150% increase to defense. The defense that you get is not multiplied on your modules, just on the base. You can get this easily to be procced all the time, as long as you have a cooldown for your first ability under 5 seconds. You'll always have a 150% increase to your defense. This second ability, Magnetic Bulwark. Magnetic Bulwark uses your shields over time in order to keep it active. It still has a duration as well, and its HP and all defenses are equivalent to Kyle's. Once again, the range cannot be increased by range modules, but the duration can be increased by duration modules. How much magnetic force you get on the enemy damaging you is predicated on 100% of the damage that the enemy is dealing to you. This also increases your magnetic force gauge. The ability itself is a little odd, though. There's some drainage happening somewhere in the skill. Otherwise, you would get 100% of your magnetic force for 10 seconds of use, which definitely does not happen. His third ability, Magnetism Spurt. Instead of taking damage through normal means, now you use your magnetic force gauge as your health bar. And then whenever the shield ends or when you run out of magnetic force, it explodes. The good part about this ability is that while you are aiming, you can explode the ability and not cancel your aim. A combination of 3 and 2 is a lot of times the best way to play Kyle, because you can sit there ADSing while spamming your abilities whenever you have them. There's very little interrupt time as long as you are in front of the enemy you are shooting, so Kyle can be very good with an Enduring Legacy or something that does good sustained damage output. This also recovers your shield whenever it explodes, so you can easily use this to keep yourself alive. The best way to play Kyle is to acquire magnetic force, keep ADS. If you're taking damage, spam your 3 and keep on trucking. If you build Kyle for good cooldown and good measurement, you can pretty much tank everything in the game because your recharge rate on your magnetic force gauge and your shield is so high. A lot of people like running overwhelming shield. I don't really like that because I think it's a waste. You get 14,000 magnetic force if you have only 7,000 shield. So while you're sitting there in this state, your total hit points are 21,000 shield and 1,000 hit points. And then whenever your shield depletes, because you're not in that stage anymore, if you have your cooldown high enough, you can easily just become immortal. So the ability is at 30 seconds. You cannot spam it like you could before, but even at that, this dimension does work with multi-talented, so if you really wanted to, go for a maximum cooldown type build, which is what I have. You'll see whenever you can trigger the magnetic force, you get a much shorter cooldown than when you don't have it triggered. Multi-talented is an odd duck to use, so Basically, whenever you activate a dimension skill, your cooldown is 20%. There are other effects in multi-talented, but you are rewarded with an extra cooldown timer, which you can see by the green down arrow circle thing. And as long as your ability ends while you still have that buff, you'll get your ability back much, much faster. But if you activate a tech ability, you get a different ability from multi-talented. So now you have to wait for this ability to end. So what you really want to do is time your abilities very effectively, proc the ability, and you can spam your first while that cooldown is active, and then explode it and activate your second ability for the perk again. And this, in my opinion, is the best way to play Kyle. And you can do all of that whilst aiming down sights. Although this is very hard unless you're on controllers, so controller players, Kyle is a win. On that side note, his most damaging ability actually comes from superconductivity thrusters, which is his 4th ability. Now it has an insane skill power modifier of 27,000. And if you build Kyle right, you can crit for more than 97 million, which is what I did. You can get this number up to around 110 million, actually. However, it's really not consistent, and it's very hard to do anything outside of one-shotting a Colossus with that. It's also noted that Kyle has a low crit, so this particular build that I have built Kyle with for crit, for that to do 100 million damage, I only use it when I have a Luna. It is also important to note that my reactor for Kyle is very mediocre, and you also need Secret Garden stacks in order to do it. Without the Secret Garden stacks, you only do around 82 million damage. Secret Garden is basically the only thing to use with Kyle, in my opinion, as long as you care about skill damage and you're not focused on protecting a lot, which I don't think you should as Kyle. So my third setting, Pocket Luna. This is what I use whenever I have Luna in the party. Basically, I spawn in to the mission, and I try to keep my Secret Garden stacks procced using the first ability, which the cooldown is low enough that you should just be able to keep your Secret Garden stacks, minded that you're mindful of how you're spamming your abilities. So I'm at 3. Whenever you are at 3, spam your abilities till you get a 3rd stack of Secret Garden, or you might lose it, and then you can hit it for 24 million not crit. That's how using the 4th ability with Secret Garden has to go. However, for all of the other abilities, this one in particular, which is tech, this one's damage will increase based off of the Secret Garden procs, and you can just get away with spamming it. Reactors on Kyle. Of course, you need a non-attribute reactor for Kyle. In my opinion, you should use the Secret Garden because it will give you the most damage amongst all of the reactors for your skills. I have tech and tech skill power boost ratio. Fortunately, I can't farm a better Secret Garden reactor right now because this week's reactor farms are dookie butter. But this is my reactor for ulting Kyle. However, I do have to say, if you are building a number 3 spam build, I think that you should go with a dimension reactor instead. That's for reactors. On components, Kyle is definitely a shield descendant. That being said, I don't think you need more than 7,000 shields on Kyle, so I run the Slayer set whenever I'm using Kyle for anything, because if I see impending doom, I'm going to just reactivate my 3rd ability anyway, and then activate my 1st ability to get 150% defense buff regardless, and that will give me at 18,000 defense and 21,000 shields. I do think you should run elemental resistance on Kyle. I have resistance whenever I'm going out and fighting things. If I'm fighting Gluttony, obviously want chill resistance on. Always have resistance on the module for crazy things that you might be fighting. If you're farming, who cares? If you want the crazy shield Kyle build, what you're going to want, which one you're going to need overwhelming shield for, so that's the reason I don't have it. HP conversion, increase shield, and then you actually want hit point components. The reason you want hit point components is because you gain more shield out of converting your hit points to shield with overwhelming shield and then buffing it with shield modifiers or modules on your descendant. Whenever you're selecting components for this, the HP support auxiliary power unit has the most HP on the white stat. A lot of these sets don't always have maximum HP. And then the sensors, Frozen Heart has the maximum hit points you can have. The Annihilation Memory has the highest points you can have. And then, funny enough, the Slayer Processor has the highest hit points you can have. On the Slayer Processor, you want max shield, and I have 31,000 shields already. And then an Amplification Control will bring me to 34,000 shield. And I do believe this is the most shield you can have. You might be able to have more using other tech, but complete honesty, I don't like using this because, one, I have very little left on my build after I get 34,000 shield. So if you're a running, gunning type Kyle and all you want to do is use like Enduring Legacy and stay alive the whole time, this is an insane build, but you do need a lot of cooldown. So don't worry about skill damage except for focus on non-attribute. This will give you 88% cooldown, so don't slot any more cooldown on your reactor or you'll waste cooldown. And using this, you can easily spam your abilities provided that you use multi-talented correctly. I use multi-talented there wrong to show you how long it takes. And then activate the other ability and just keep multi-talented procced. A note on his fourth ability. If you want to use his fourth ability while the multi-talented dimension cooldown is active, in order to get 12-second cooldown on superconductivity thrusters, which is insane, you want to proc the ability and use superconductivity thrusters as fast as possible to proc the cooldown effect whenever his superconductivity thrusters end, because it must be in the window for multi-talented. If I hit the ground, it takes forever for me to get back up, and I barely have enough time for the ability. If I hit an enemy, you get up much faster. If you take too long to use superconductivity thrusters, whenever the ability ends, you won't have multi-talented proc, and it takes very long for it to cool down. So a note on his fourth ability, and it's why I've waited this long to explain how it works, is that it deals additional damage. You can see the additional damage: consume magnetic force times 12,800. So your magnetic force is predicated on your shields. You get 2 times your shields in magnetic force. You have to use 30% of your magnetic force to use the ability. So if you have 70% left over, the additional damage is 0.7 times 2 of your shield times 128 from the additional damage. These are level 100 enemies, and now it's dealing 9 million damage without the crit and without Secret Garden stacks. With Secret Garden stacks, you deal 10 million damage. So this ability is also the ability that you want if you don't want to use Secret Garden, because a large portion of your damage is coming from that additional damage from having 34,000 shields. If you're going to build Shield Kyle, this is how I would build him. You can do what you want, but I don't like Shield Kyle that much. Now we'll go into his modules. So the first module that we'll go over is Self-Directed Eruption. I have focus on non-attribute, and I have my cooldown maxed out on this build as well. I only run increased shield and HP conversion because, once again, at enough shields, I get enough magnetic force. I don't have to worry that much about dying. The ability itself turns what Kyle has. The Tractor Beam sports massive lulls and is basically the only way that you should build a ad clearing Kyle, in my opinion. So each of these squares is 5 meters. 1, 2. You'll see the insane range on Self-Directed Eruption, and it's why I built it. Self-Directed Eruption changes his pulsability into a tractor cannon that sucks enemies in like that and explodes them. You still get the maximum shield recovery, and you still get to use your magnetic force as your HP gauge. and it still pulses as normal. So I think this is a very good module for an ad clearing Kyle, and what you should do if you want to clear ads with Kyle. The next ability is all of the rage right now, superconductive bombing. I actually think superconductive bombing is slightly overrated in bossing. I would rather have the capability to just yeet myself into the void's face. And the reason this is simply because of the inconsistency that this module has when facing void intercept bosses. If I go into Dead Bride and demonstrate this module, it will become apparent. So the first thing we must do is develop our stacks. We always have to have maximum magnetic force for this ability, in my opinion, to make it worth it. And you sit there often chasing the boss a lot. And the build only really works if you have a cracked out reactor with additional damage on Colossus equipped. You can do more damage if you build for crit. I did not really want this build for Colossus fighting, just because of the simple inconsistencies of it doing so. Honestly, I really like this build in general, but I wouldn't use it as a Colossus nuker. Once again, you could build into Colossus nuking and this build would be fine. But once again, if you don't have attack on Colossus on your reactor with the Secret Garden, I don't find it worth it anyway. If you'd really like to one-shot a majority of the single-player void bosses in the game, this lovely little watermelon crushing Snicker bar right here, Haley. Go build her, honestly, if you want a solo boss killer, because I do think that she is the best in the game. If I was forced to play a one-shot Kyle, and the Kyle that I have for whenever there's a Pocket Luna, I have this build. This becomes Dangerous Ambush. But to be honest with you, you could replace it with a Spear and Shield or an empty slot if you don't want to catalyze Kyle again. The No Retreat module also works on Kyle, but whenever you compare it to Dangerous Ambush, it pales in comparison. And it has a 30-second cooldown, so I don't really like it that much. So to be honest with you, I would just replace it with the Spear and Shield if you're going to replace it with anything. But if we're solo bossing, I will just play this version of Kyle regardless. Now we have Diamagnetic Bulwark. So this switches his second ability into a shield that you can use to push enemies. You get magnetic force back based off of the amount of enemies you pushed or the amount of times you pushed one enemy. It does damage enemies, so I think unlike a max damage build, you could clear ads with this, but it's still not good. The only reason I would really use this is in defenses, because in defenses, when enemies are surrounding the resource, and possibly in future content, this might actually be helpful. But it does offer some comedic relief if you want to run it. The fact there's a limit on knockbacks is off-putting to me, but this is a very fast way to recover your magnetic force. Although you could really just use his first ability with cooldown if that was the reason. Then we have Collision Instinct. So this could be very good, especially inside dungeons or invasions or the mega dungeons that are to come. The reason I say that
I'm ready.
Is because it does stun the enemies, and this ability has a very short cooldown. Although you do lose the defense buff you get from this, it has the same cooldown and you get to stun enemies. So if you just spam this like you would your normal ability with maximum range as well, I do think you would be a valuable asset in a dungeon. Or you can just use it to stun things. Otherwise, I think no module is better. On my ad clearing dungeon build, that's what this build is for. I do have conditional recharge on here. Conditional recharge or shield collector work just as fine, and biosync shield work as well. Biosync shield lets you pick up health orbs and it recharges your shield. So this is for all the overwhelming shield users, honestly, but once again, I'm not running overwhelming shield. I don't need to. That's Kyle, and that's how I've chosen to build him. If you want any of these three builds, here's the first one, here's the second one, and here is the third one. I spent a ton of time building Kyle. He currently has 16 catalysts in him. I really hope he does not get another buff, because then I'll probably have to put more catalysts in him, because he's so cool. Kyle is a really good character, although I do think you would need other descendants if you chose to build Kyle, as opposed to a bunny or a clay. Those two could be the only descendants that you actually need in this game. However, I enjoy playing Kyle, and if you want to only play Kyle, you would still have a lot of fun with the first descendant. On a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is farming secret garden nanotubes and 5 is making out with your estranged third removed cousin that you haven't seen in 5 years, he rates on about a 5 for me personally. I really enjoy playing Kyle. That's Kyle. The new buffs are sick. Thanks, Nexon. I would do Freyna and SMO, but I can't farm their reactors because unthank Nexon for not letting me farm the reactors that I need to farm. My next one will be SMO whenever I can farm his reactor. Thanks for watching. Check out my channel if you like how I do content. Consider subscribing. Y'all have a sick day and peace out.